The sky over Chicago is a painting of violence, rendered in the only colors this world truly knows: the charcoal gray of smoke, the deep rust brown of pulverized brick, and the vivid, shocking crimson of exposed infrastructure and human life. It is not a metaphor. A fine, persistent mist hangs in the air, a spectral fog of pulverized concrete, atomized glass, and vaporized blood, tinting the low-hanging sun a sickly, bruised pink. The sound is a constant, layered symphony of despair, a composition for the end of days, the deep, tectonic groan of collapsing skyscrapers giving up their ghosts, the high, metallic shriek of I-beams twisting into modern art sculptures of failure, the distant, tinny screams that rise, peak, and are cut short with wet, abrupt finality. On the street, a stage of ruin, the guardians of the globe are not losing. They are fighting. They are straining. This is the critical distinction of their universe. Victory is not a foregone conclusion written in the stars. It is a bloody, inch-by-inch purchase paid for in flesh, will, and sanity. Their opponent is a grotesque biomechanical horror, codenamed Abyssal, a living geological event that erupted from a secret lab 3 miles beneath the city. Its body is a cathedral of chitinous plating, dripping corrosive slime. Its form a mockery of evolution, all jagged edges and whip-crack tendrils. War Woman, the bedrock of the team, swings her mace. It is not a graceful arc. It is a physics equation of brutal intent. The weapon, an artifact of myth, connects with a sickening, wet crack that echoes off the canyon walls of skyscrapers. The shockwave travels up her arms, and she bellows, not a battle cry, but a roar of pure animal effort. The muscles in her arms and neck chord into topographical maps of strain. The creature staggers, a plate shattering but does not fall. For her effort, she earns a spray of acidic ichor that sears the side of her face, and the knowledge that she must do it again and again until her body or the monster breaks. Beside her, Red Rush is a study in furious, futile velocity. He is not a man running. He is a crimson scar vibrating across reality. 1,000 strikes per second, each one a calculated, precise exertion targeting neural clusters, hydraulic fluid lines, weak points in the armor. To a normal eye, he is a blur. In his own perception, it is a grueling marathon of infinite detail. He sees the microfracture in a plate, aims for it, strikes. He sees the telltale contraction of a muscle before a tendril lashes out. He moves to dodge, but the body is not infinite. Tendons scream. Synapses fire slower on the 1,000th repetition. He is a fraction of a microsecond too slow. The spiked tendril, moving at a speed that would be a blur to anyone else, is a languid, inevitable spear in his vision. It punches through his shoulder with a sound like a wet paper bag bursting. The noise he makes is not a scream of pain. It is a gasp of profound, exhausted surprise. The world, so slow and malleable a moment before, snaps back into brutal, normal time. He stumbles, a puppet with cut strings, and the symphony of destruction rushes in to fill the space his speed had occupied. This is the Invincible universe. Here, power is not a gift. It is not a miracle. It is a transaction. A high-interest loan taken out against the corpuscles of the body and the sanctity of the soul, and the payment is always, always extracted in full. In blood, in trauma, in the quiet, hollow look that follows a survival you cannot quite believe you earned. Every superhuman feat, the lifted bus, the repelled asteroid, the punched-through monster, is met with an equal and opposite reaction. Torn ligaments that will ache for months. psychic burnout that leaves a mind echoing and fragile. The moral compromise of choosing which building to save, which street of screaming voices to prioritize. Heroes do not retire to accolades. They die. They die publicly, messily, viscerally. Their bodies are broken on live television. Their final moments analyzed in slow motion by talking heads. They leave behind cratered city blocks and grieving families who receive a flag and a plaque that feels like ashes in the mouth. Their sacrifice is meant to mean something. It is the grim engine of this world's harsh, unwavering logic. To protect something of value, you must risk something of equal value. Your life, your body, your peace. It is a brutal, unforgiving economy, but it is an economy every citizen, every hero, every villain understands. Strength has a price. Effort has a result. A punch matters. The dimensional anomaly does not announce the apocalypse. It does not roar with the fury of torn spacetime. It does not erupt in a kaleidoscope of impossible cosmic energy. It is a flaw, a mistake, a silent, hairline crack in the cheap plaster of reality, unnoticed by the grand struggle a mile away. It appears in a grimy back alley, a place already forgotten by the city, strewn with the corpses of garbage bags and the skeletal wreckage of a burnt-out sedan. It glimmers for a single moment, a vertical sliver of wrongness, a cut in the film of the world that shows a different, emptier light behind it. And then it smooths over, healing itself with a quiet sigh. And he is just there. Saitama stands in the alley. His bright yellow jumpsuit and cheap white cape are absurdly vivid against the monochrome grime, a child's cartoon character dropped into a documentary about urban decay. He sniffs the air. He smells ozone from fried power lines, the acrid bite of synthetic materials burning, and underneath it all, the thick copper tang of blood, a scent that hangs in this world like humidity. He hears the distant, rolling thunder of the battle, the bass note of collapsing architecture. His face, with its simple, placid features, is marked only by a faint, passive curiosity. He is not shocked by the destruction. In his world, monsters the size of office blocks appear on Tuesday. City districts are leveled as a matter of course. He is mildly confused by the intensity, the sheer, unadulterated effort in the sounds. Here, the violence lacks the ritualistic, almost procedural quality he's used to. It feels raw, personal. It lacks the comfortable buffer of the absurd. It is like watching a tooth being pulled without anesthetic, all grinding pressure and naked biological truth. He walks out onto the main thoroughfare, a river of cracked asphalt and abandoned vehicles. He steps over a fissure in the street, a black seam that drops away into steaming darkness, as casually as one steps over a crack in the sidewalk. A block to the east, a building, sheared clean through at its midpoint by the abyssal's thrashing tail, begins its final groaning descent. It is a 40-story monument of steel and glass, and its fall is a slow, majestic tragedy of physics. On the street directly below, a group of 7 civilians, a man in a torn business suit, a woman clutching 2 young children, 3 teenagers huddled together, are frozen. They are not trapped by rubble so much as by the sheer, paralyzing scope of their doom. Their faces are not masks of panic, but of a pure, simple terror that has bypassed the brain and gone straight to the marrow. They have seen the shadow engulf them. They know the mathematics are absolute. A news helicopter, its pilot buzzing at the very edge of the mandated exclusion zone, captures the iconic shot. The geometric shadow of the falling monolith, the tiny, ant-like helplessness of the figures, the perfect framing of inevitability. Saitama looks up. He does not gasp. He does not widen his eyes. He observes. He calculates the trajectory, not with advanced targeting computers or super speed perception, but with the dull, practiced familiarity of a man checking a bus schedule. Angle of descent, mass, wind resistance. Yeah, they're gonna get squished. He bends his knees. It is not a heroic, deep crouch, muscles coiling like springs. It is the slight, casual dip of a man preparing to step onto a low curb. He pushes off. The physics of his movement are an insult to the struggling world around him. There is no sonic boom tearing the air asunder. No dramatic crater explodes beneath his feet. The air barely stirs, offering a soft, whispering protest. He does not become a blur. He is simply not here, and then he is simply there, a solid yellow and white parenthesis between the collapsing weight of civilization and the fragile punctuation of human lives. A 50-story mass of engineered steel, reinforced concrete, and human ambition, weighing hundreds of thousands of tons, moving with the gravitational momentum of a small mountain, meets the open, gloved palm of his right hand. The sound is wrong. It should be a cataclysmic, grinding explosion, the birth cry of a new crater. It should be the loudest sound in the city. Instead, it is a soft, profound, deeply internal thud, the sound of a heavyweight mattress dropped onto a solid oak floor, the sound of a great heart stopping. The building stops. Completely. Instantly. Dust puffs out from the point of impact in a perfect, expanding ring, then settles like falling snow. Saitama's arm, from fingertip to shoulder, does not tremble. It does not buckle. It is a piston made of something other than matter, holding up the sky. His expression does not change. No gritted teeth, no straining neck. His eyes are half-lidded, almost bored. He tilts his hand, a minimal wrist flick of adjustment. The entire skyscraper, this immense dead weight, slides sideways with an eerie, silent grace, as if on greased rails. It settles into an adjacent empty lot, a space cleared for a development that never came, with a ground-shaking yet curiously muted crunch. It lies there, intact but asleep, like a felled giant. He drops back to the street, landing with a soft, precise tap of his red boots. He looks at the civilians. They are no longer staring at the space where death was. They are staring at him. Their expressions have cycled through terror, through disbelief, and have settled on a dawning, profound disquiet. This was not a rescue. It was a negation. The equation of their doom was not solved. It was erased from the blackboard. There is no gratitude in their eyes, only the bewildered terror of those whose fundamental understanding of reality, that big things crush small things, has just been invalidated. He gives a small, awkward wave, a gesture utterly divorced from the magnitude of the act. He says, his voice flat, almost drowned by the resumed sounds of distant combat. You should probably go that way. He points a thumb over his shoulder, indicating a relatively clear side street. The news feed zooms in, the camera lens hunting for the story. It finds his face. There is no sweat beading on his bald head, no heavy breathing fogging the air, no vein throbbing at his temple. His eyes hold no fiery resolve, no grim satisfaction, no heroic light. They are just eyes. The helicopter's sensitive microphone, filtering out the low rumble, picks up the chilling contrast. The ragged, wet coughing of Red Rush 2 blocks over. The guttural shout of war woman calling for a fallback. The ceaseless, hungry grinding of the monster. and from the epicenter of the miracle, only the soft rustle of his cape in the wind and his bland, dismissive statement. The contrast is not inspiring. It is horrifying. In the deep, cooling shadows of a still-standing office tower 3 blocks north, a figure watches from a shattered observation deck. Nolan Grayson, Omni-Man, had been observing the Guardians struggle with the detached professional assessment of a master sculptor watching apprentices chip at marble. He gauged their form, their efficiency, their inevitable failure. It was a matter of time, and time was a resource he controlled. Now, every atom of his attention is locked on the bald man in the cheap costume. His Viltrumite hearing, capable of isolating a single heartbeat in a riot, had picked up the non-sound of the impact. The soft thud that was quieter than the rustle of his own cape. His senses, honed across centuries and battlefields, attuned to the vibrations of power, the thrum of a reactor, the bioelectric surge of a metahuman exerting themselves, the seismic footprint of mighty muscles straining, felt nothing, a perfect null reading. It was as if the laws of physics, those loyal soldiers, had simply parted around this man, too afraid to announce his presence, too confused to apply their rules. A cold, unfamiliar knot tightens deep in Omni-Man's gut. It is not fear. He has forgotten the taste of fear. It is something more primal, more disquieting, the instinctual cellular alarm of a supreme predator, a creature that has defined the rules of its jungle for 1,000 years, that has just seen a shadow move in a way that defies all known laws of motion, of threat, of being. It is the silent, screaming wrongness of a theorem disproven by a casual glance. He senses something that does not belong. The Global Defense Agency's subterranean command center was a cathedral of controlled paranoia. Buried beneath layers of tungsten, lead, and psychic dampeners, it hummed with a tense, sterile anxiety, the air perpetually tasting of recycled oxygen and cold dread. Every wall was a screen, and on every screen the same impossible clip played on a silent, maddening loop. The 40-story skyscraper descending, the yellow blur intercepting, the gentle tilt of a palm, the building sliding obediently to rest. An act of world-altering physics rendered with the casual effort of a man adjusting a painting on a wall. Cecil Stedman stood before the central holodisplay, a monolith of contained authority. The ever-present cigar was between his fingers, unlit, a small personal superstition. He would light it when he understood the threat, a moment that felt increasingly mythical. His good eye, a pale blue chip of glacial ice, was narrowed, absorbing the data streams cascading down the periphery. "Analysis," he said. His voice was gravel wrapped in silk, a sound that had terminated careers and authorized orbital strikes. Dr. Emily Brandt, the head of Xenobiological and Anomalous Threat Assessment, looked like a woman who had just witnessed her life's work dissolve into fairy tales. Her fingers, usually a blur of confident precision over the holographic interface, now moved with a hesitant, stuttering rhythm. "Director, we've run every scan in the catalog, and then we invented 3 new ones." She swallowed, the sound picked up by the sensitive lab microphones. "Passive thermal imaging shows a human male at a consistent 37 degrees Celsius. Resting heart rate? No spike in adrenal output, no cortisol elevation. It's the biometric signature of a man watching a moderately interesting documentary." Cecil didn't move. "Continue." "Active deep tissue resonance scan shows musculature and skeletal density within standard human parameters. If anything, his physique appears underwhelming for a claimed hero. No gamma radiation signature. No quantum flux indicative of extra-dimensional energy tapping. No tachyon particles, no chronoton leakage, no psionic waveform. We bombarded the area with every known energy particle. They behaved normally until they reached his approximate location, at which point the data simply becomes noise. Not deflection, not absorption, noise. She called up the kinetic analysis. A simulation played. A brilliant, violent rendering of what asterisk should asterisk have happened. The skyscraper's mass and velocity translated into numbers that scrolled like a stock market crash. The kinetic energy transfer at the moment of impact, she said, her voice hollow, was sufficient to vaporize a battalion of battle tanks and excavate a crater approximately 1.2 miles in diameter, with seismic effects felt across 3 states. She replaced it with the sensor log from the event, a flat, lazy green line showing a minor atmospheric pressure bump, a gentle ripple. Our orbital and ground-based arrays registered this, the equivalent of a stiff breeze passing over a sensor dome. Cecil's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He redirected a skyscraper with his hand. According to every law of physics we have codified, tested, and weaponized, sir, Brant said, finally meeting his eye, her own gaze haunted. He didn't. The energy involved ceased to exist as a transactional force. It's as if the universe, at the point of his presence, skipped a step in the equation. It went from falling object to stationary object without passing through the catastrophic release of energy that bridges those 2 states. Cecil's mind, a formidable engine built for threat assessment, control, and the grim calculus of manageable power, ground against a paradox it could not process. In his world, power was a declarative statement. It roared. It radiated heat and light and fear. It left a forensic trail of radiation burns, genetic corruption, or psychic scars. It was a signature you could trace, a profile you could build, a weapon you could, in theory, counter. This was different. This was not a statement. It was an erasure, a null point, a living, breathing blind spot in causality itself. A black hole wearing discount spandex. The directive was issued, wrapped in the benign packaging of multiversal outreach and cooperation. The subject, codenamed Cape Bald, was to be assessed. The first test was a gift, a controlled Flaxen incursion in the Nevada desert. The Flaxens, small, militaristic, dimensional travelers, were predictable, expendable, and their energy weapons provided a nice, scalable metric of durability. The security feeds from the temporary forward base showed Saitama arriving in a GDA Jeep, looking mildly perplexed. An agent pointed towards the shimmering portal and the horde of screeching, plasma rifle-wielding warriors pouring out. Saitama nodded, mumbled a thanks, and began to walk. Not run, not fly. Asterisk, walk, asterisk. What followed was not a battle. It was a stroll through a particularly annoying museum exhibit. He ambled directly into the advancing swarm. Bright lances of green plasma capable of vaporizing steel flashed towards him. They impacted inches from his face, his chest, his eyes, and dissipated. Not with a shield shimmer, not with a deflection. They simply stopped being coherent energy, washing over him like harmless light. The heat, sufficient to melt tank armor, didn't cause him to blink. He would occasionally turn his head slightly as a bolt passed close to his ear. His expression one of vague, distracted annoyance, like someone bothered by a buzzing gnat. A Flaxen commander, shrieking orders, charged with a crackling vibroblade. Saitama, without breaking stride, sidestepped and swatted the creature with the back of his hand. The motion was idle, effortless, the same gesture one uses to brush a cobweb from a doorway. The flaxen didn't simply fall, it vanished in a puff of disaggregated atoms, its weapon clattering to the dusty ground. Saitama paused, looked at the empty space for a second, shrugged, and kept walking. Within 47 seconds, the flaxen assault collapsed. Not from tactical defeat, from systemic existential terror. Their ranks broke, not in retreat, but in a scrambling, shrieking panic to get back through their own portal. The commander's final transmission, picked up by GDA listeners, was a shrill, static-laced loop. Asterisk. What is it? What does it want? It doesn't fight. It doesn't fight. It just walks. The second test was interpersonal. A welcome to the neighborhood sparring session with the newly reformed Guardians, held in a maximum security training facility deep under the Colorado Rockies. The air was thick with the unspoken tension of recent death and fragile resurrection. Immortal, his pride a raw, smarting wound beneath his resurrected skin, stood across from Saitama. The bald man looked around the vast, steel-plated chamber, his hands in his jumpsuit pockets. "Let's see what you're made of, son," Immortal said, his voice a gravelly boom that held 5,000 years of combat experience. He rolled shoulders that had borne the weight of empires. "Don't hold back on my account." Saitama took his hands out of his pockets. "Okay, but I usually try to." Immortal charged. It was not a test, it was a declaration. A roar tore from his lungs, a sound that had preceded the felling of dragons and the topplings of tyrants. He moved with the speed and power of a battering ram launched from a cannon, his fist aimed not to maim but to demonstrate, a blow that would shatter a main battle tank. Saitama moved. To the high-speed cameras, it was a single, minimal frame of adjustment. He shifted his weight, a motion so small it seemed like a slight sway. Immortal's fist passed through the space where Saitama's head had been, the displaced air cracking like a whip. In the same fluid, lazy motion, Saitama brought the edge of his right hand up in a short, precise arc. It connected with the back of Immortal's neck, just below the skull. It was not a punch, it was a neurological off-switch. The mighty roar was severed, cut into a soft, surprised exhale. Immortal's eyes, full of furious purpose, glazed over instantly. His formidable body, a monument to immortal strength, went limp. He dropped to the reinforced floor like a sack of grain, landing with a heavy, final thud asterisk. He did not move. The silence in the training room was absolute, a physical weight. Adam Eve's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide above her fingers. Duplicate 20 copies all stood frozen in identical poses of shock, their collective breath held. Rexplode's smirk died unborn. The Martian man, floating, slowly lowered himself to the ground, his form rippling with unsettled shapes. The humiliation was not in the defeat. It was in the method. The sheer, insulting triviality of it. A being who had survived centuries of warfare was rendered unconscious with emotion no more strenuous than chopping a loaf of bread. The message was not, "I am stronger than you." The message was, "Your strength is not a factor in this equation." It was Mark Grayson, still aching from a brutal patrol that had ended with a broken arm, now healing but throbbing, and the blood of a bank robber he'd failed to subdue without injury staining his gloves, who finally sought a human answer. He found Saitama not in a lab or a briefing room, but on a park bench overlooking the jagged, skeletal skyline of a city trying to rebuild. The sunset painted the world in tones of orange and deep blue, a beautiful lie over the scars. Mark sat down, not beside him, but at the other end of the bench, a respectful distance for something he didn't understand. He didn't wear his costume. He wore the weariness of a teenager carrying a planet. How? The word was all he could muster, stripped of heroics, of bravado. Saitama didn't look at him. His eyes were on the horizon, reflecting the dying light, holding no awe, no melancholy. I trained really hard, he said, his voice as flat as the bench beneath them. 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, 100 squats, a 10-kilometer run every single day for 3 years. No air conditioning in the summer. Mark waited. The silence stretched. The formula hung in the air, naked and absurd. That's it? Yeah. Mark's mind rebelled. He gestured vaguely toward the city, toward the unseen GDA bases, toward the memory of Immortal collapsing. But the building, the Flaxens, Immortal, that can't come from asterisk calisthenics asterisk. For the first time, Saitama's placid mask showed a hairline fracture. A faint, almost imperceptible furrow appeared between his brows, a hint of genuine personal frustration. I know, he said, the word tinged with a quiet aggravation that felt more profound than any shout. It's boring, right? No matter what shows up. Monster, alien, robot, immortal guy. No matter how strong they seem. It's always just... He looked at his own fist, opening and closing it slowly. One punch. Mark felt the word like a physical blow to the center of his chest. Asterisk, boring asterisk. In his world, every victory was purchased with pain. Every lesson was etched in scars. His own father's voice was a constant drill in his mind. Asterisk power is responsibility. Strength is a burden you earn through struggle and blood. It is the mantle of the superior, and it demands everything. This man, this impossible nullity, had distilled the pinnacle of existence down to a single devastating adjective. Asterisk, boring asterisk. Don't you want to use it? Mark asked, his voice softer now, almost pleading. To make a real difference? To lead people? Or shape things? Saitama finally turned his head. His gaze was unsettling, not for its intensity, but for its utter lack of it. It was a direct, unblinking look that seemed to see through the question to the fragile architecture of need behind it. Lead? He repeated, as if tasting a strange, unpalatable food. That sounds like a lot of work, a lot of meetings. I just wanted to be a hero. For fun. He looked back at the sunset, and his next words were so quiet they were almost lost in the evening breeze. Now the fun's gone. He stood up, brushing non-existent crumbs from his pants. Your world is really loud, and everyone here, they're all trying so hard all the time. He began to walk away, then paused, throwing the observation over his shoulder like discarded trash. It's kind of depressing. Mark sat on the bench long after Saitama had vanished into the gathering dusk. The chill that seeped into his bones had nothing to do with the temperature. His entire philosophy, the nascent code he was bleeding to build his life upon, the sacred link between power, effort, and sacrifice, felt suddenly terribly fragile. It wasn't being challenged. It was being rendered irrelevant, like a beautiful, complex sandcastle being ignored by a tide that simply rises to a different, unarguable level. High above, Hidden within the dense, frigid womb of a cumulonimbus cloud, Nolan Grayson watched the heat signatures of the conversation dissolve. His Viltrumite hearing had captured every syllable, every flat inflection, every empty space between the words. The training regimen, a pathetic human exercise. The confession of boredom, an unforgivable sin against the very concept of might. The dismissal of leadership, of purpose, of dominion asterisk. To a Viltrumite, this was not mere heresy. It was a fundamental insanity, a corruption of the universe's core principle. Power asterisk was asterisk purpose. Power asterisk was asterisk destiny. It was the genetic and moral right to rule, to sculpt chaos into order, to impose your will upon the stars, because you, asterisk, could asterisk. And that asterisk could asterisk was the only justification ever needed. This creature, this asterisk thing, asterisk, possessed what seemed to be a limitless expression of that principle, and it had distilled it down to a hobby, a tedious chore, an inconvenient trait that had robbed its owner of enjoyment. The cold knot that had formed in his gut in Chicago tightened further, crystallizing into a dense, sharp seed of pure, incandescent rage. This could not stand. This void, this walking contradiction was an active poison. It did not just defy the Viltrumite way, it quietly, blandly proved it unnecessary. It was an obscenity against the natural order, a cosmic mistake that threatened to unravel the very fabric of ambition, the glorious struggle that defined life itself. The decision was not tactical. It was biological, instinctual, a compulsion to reassert reality. The paradox had to be confronted, challenged, and broken upon the anvil of true, purposeful strength. It had to be made to explain itself or be erased. He decided to confront Saitama personally. The stage was chosen with the cold, theatrical precision of a master propagandist. The Nevada desert, just after sunset. The sky was a vast, bruised canvas, bleeding from orange into deep purple. The first defiant stars pricking through the high, thin atmosphere. Below an endless, flat expanse of hard-baked earth and scrub, a geological tabula rasa under a dome of darkening sky. It was a place of nothing, which meant it was a place for everything to be proven. A place where a god could speak without interruption, where an object lesson could be delivered without the messy complication of cities or witnesses beyond the approved ones. The perfect canvas for a demonstration of order. A nervous GDA convoy, a procession of sleek black vehicles that seemed like beetles scurrying across an empty plate, had deposited its passenger an hour before. They had left him with a bottle of water and a communicator that now lay untouched in the dust. Saitama stood in the middle of the nothingness, hands in the pockets of his jumpsuit, looking at a tumbleweed that had gotten caught on a rock. It rattled in the dry, cooling wind. He watched it with a kind of blank focus, as if the chaotic, scraping dance of the dead plant were the most compelling thing in the universe. The arrival was not subtle. It was a declaration written in atmosphere. A sonic boom, delayed and thunderous, rolled across the desert a full second after the event. The air itself seemed to tear, a visible ripple of distortion that shot outwards from the point of impact. Omni-Man descended not like a man, but like a judgment. A comet of white and crimson, he slammed into the earth 50 feet from Saitama with a asterisk crack asterisk that shook the bedrock. The ground did not simply crater, it asterisk pedaled asterisk upwards, great slabs of ancient desert floor lifting and then collapsing in a ring of devastation. Dust, fine as powder and thick as fog, billowed out in a choking cloud, slowly settling to reveal him standing in the epicenter, untouched, pristine. His cape, heavy and scarlet, settled around his boots with a final dramatic sigh. He stood with his arms slightly away from his body, his posture not one of attack, but of supreme, unassailable presentation. You. The word was not spoken. It was projected, a rolling thunderclap of a voice, devoid of any human warmth, saturated with a gravity that seemed to press down on the very air. It was the voice of monuments and edicts. Saitama turned, not with a start, but with the slow, mildly interested pivot of someone hearing their name called in a crowded mall. The dust cloud settled on his shoulders like dandruff. He blinked, taking in the crater, the pose, the figure. A flicker of recognition passed over his placid face. "Oh, hey," he gave a small, polite nod. "You're that really famous guy. Omni-Man, right? From the billboards and the cereal boxes." He offered a faint, socially obligated smile. Nolan Grayson did not acknowledge the greeting. To do so would be to enter a dialogue, and this was not a dialogue. This was a pronouncement. The smile, the trivial recognition, they were insects buzzing against the windshield of his purpose. He began to speak, and his words were not for Saitama alone. They were for the GDA satellites triangulating overhead, for the record, for the universe itself to bear witness to the truth being explained. "You do not belong here," he stated, the absolute finality in his tone leaving no room for contradiction. He took a single step forward, not a walk, but an advancement of territory. "Your presence is an error, a miscalculation in the careful architecture of this world." He paused, letting the silence amplify him. "Strength is not an accident. It is not a whim. It is not a asterisk hobby asterisk." He began to pace a slow, deliberate circle around Saitama, who turned his head slightly to follow him, his expression one of passive curiosity. "Strength is the culmination," Omni-Man continued, his voice a low, resonant drum, "of millennia of perfect lineage, of discipline refined in the fires of conquest. It is the manifest proof of a universe's natural, brutal, and beautiful order. The strong rise, the weak fall, the strong guide, the weak follow. The strong asterisk rule asterisk, the weak serve. This is the only truth that has ever mattered. The engine of evolution, of civilization, of progress itself." He stopped, facing Saitama again, his shadow long and dark in the twilight, engulfing the smaller man. "My people, the Viltrumites, are the living embodiment of this truth. We are its pinnacle, its guardians. We do not conquer out of cruelty, we conquer to elevate, to bring the clarity of order to the screaming chaos of unguided existence. We take the raw, struggling mass of life and give it purpose, direction, peace through undeniable power." Saitama listened. His head was cocked to one side, his brow completely smooth. He didn't argue. He didn't nod in understanding or shake his head in defiance. He simply received the information. His eyes were on Omni-Man's face, but they held no challenge, no fear, no awe. They were the eyes of a man listening to a complicated, dry lecture on a topic he hadn't chosen. The way one might listen to a detailed weather report for a region one never intends to visit. "Your power," Omni-Man said, his voice dropping into a more intimate, yet more dangerous register. He floated a few inches off the ground, elevating himself, his shadow now completely swallowing Saitama. "This glitch you possess, this ability that mocks the laws that bind lesser things, wasted on apathy, on boredom asterisk. It is an insult not to me, to the very principle of strength itself. You stand at the summit of existence and complain about the view. He descended until he was eye to eye with Saitama, hovering just above the dust. You have a responsibility you are too small, too human to comprehend. A destiny written in the capacity of your own cells. You will either bow to that responsibility, accept guidance, purpose, a place in the order you were clearly, if crudely, designed to enforce, or you will be removed, erased, power that does not seek to dominate. His lip curled, the first crack in the monument's facade, revealing a glimpse of searing contempt. Is power that has failed its only purpose. It is noise, and I am here to silence it. The lecture was over. The ultimatum delivered. The desert held its breath. The satellite feeds were crystal clear, the audio pristine. Saitama scratched his cheek with a single finger, the sound absurdly loud in the silence. He looked past Omni-Man's shoulder as if searching for the words in the darkening sky. "Dominate, huh?" he said, his voice its usual flat, conversational tone. He looked back at Omni-Man, a flicker of genuine, mundane reminiscence in his eyes. "That sounds really stressful. I had a hard time dominating the half-price egg sale at the supermarket last week. The old ladies are fast asterisk. I got elbowed. It was chaos." The dismissal was not an act of rebellion. It was not a clever retort. It was the simple, unadorned truth of his worldview meeting the grand cosmic thesis of Viltrum and finding it inconvenient. It was so complete, so devoid of any intended malice or challenge that it didn't even register as disrespect. It was irrelevance asterisk. It bypassed Omni-Man's anger, his pride, his warrior's core, and struck something deeper, the foundation of his identity. The most powerful being on the planet had just been compared, unfavorably, to a pensioner in a grocery aisle. For a full 3 seconds, there was no reaction. Omni-Man hovered, his face a mask of frozen, incomprehensible stillness. Then, the mask shattered. It began not with a word, but with a sound, a low, sub-aural vibration that seemed to emanate from the earth itself, a growl from the planet's core. It rose in pitch and volume, twisting into a roar that was less anger than pure, unfiltered ontological rage. The scream of a perfect system encountering a syntax error it could not parse. The air around him, warped heat haze distorting his form. He moved. The first punch was not a test. It was an erasure. His body became a hypersonic blur, a streak of violent color against the twilight. The fist, moving at a speed that would turn tungsten to plasma, aimed not for Saitama's body, but for the space his head occupied, to remove the source of the insult from the universe. It connected. The sound was not a crash. It was a deep, resonant gong. As if a million-ton church bell had been struck by a mountain. A visible shockwave of compressed air, a perfect ring, exploded outwards at ground level, shearing the desert floor flat for a quarter mile. Saitama's head moved. A fraction of an inch. Just enough. The force that could have decapitated a continent glanced off the side of his skull. His expression didn't change. Not a flinch, not a grit of teeth. He blinked once, slowly, as if a strong wind had blown in his face. Omni-Man's form solidified for a microsecond, his eyes wide with something beyond shock, with a kind of sacred disbelief. Then the blur returned, a barrage, a storm of fists that became a continuous, shuddering drone of impacts. 100, 200, 1,000 punches in the space of a single held breath. Each strike was a killing blow for any other being on Earth, a precise, Viltrumite perfect application of world-shattering force. They struck Saitama's face, his chest, his back as Omni-Man flashed around him. The sounds merged into a single, unending, catastrophic drumbeat. Thud, 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 like distant, heavy rain on an indestructible roof. Saitama stood in the center of the storm. His cheap white cape fluttered gently in the created gales. His boots remained planted in the dust, not dug in, just standing. His hands stayed at his sides. He was an island of perfect, unbothered stillness in a hurricane of calculated annihilation. Dust, rock, and superheated air erupted in a maelstrom around him, carving a canyon 50 feet deep into the desert floor. But at the exact point where he stood, the earth was untouched, a pedestal of calm. The barrage ceased as suddenly as it began. Omni-Man reappeared, standing 10 feet away, his chest rising and falling not from exertion, but from a hyper-oxygenated, furious adrenaline spike. His fists were clenched, smoke curling from his knuckles where the atmosphere had ignited from friction. Saitama looked back at him. He raised a hand and brushed a tiny speck of desert grit from his shoulder. "Fight back!" The scream was raw, stripped of its godlike resonance, purely animal. It was the sound of a paradigm breaking. Omni-Man lunged, not with a punch, but with a grasp. He seized Saitama by the shoulders of his jumpsuit. The fabric didn't tear. He lifted him, the motion violent. And then they were gone. A second, deeper sonic boom rolled across the desert. They were already 100 miles away, a meteor headed for the side of a towering ancient mesa. The impact was not an impact, it was a displacement. The entire face of the mesa, 2 billion tons of solid rock, ceased to exist in an expanding cloud of vaporized stone. Omni-Man didn't stop. He drove forward, through the mountain Saitama held before him like a battering ram, through miles of granite and quartz, through ancient seabeds and fossilized bones, a tunnel of instant molten glass forming in their wake. They erupted from the far side in a geyser of liquefied earth that rose 1,000 feet into the air, cooling into black obsidian rain. Without pause, Omni-Man angled upwards. The atmosphere thinned, turned to black. The stars became hard, unwinking points. He reached the bitter, airless void of low Earth orbit, the planet of vast, beautiful curve below. He reversed his grip, spun, and with a roar that vibrated through his own bones in the silence, drove a double-fisted hammer blow into the center of Saitama's back. The physics were catastrophic. The force propelled Saitama back down like a divine projectile, a speck of yellow and white against the blue and white marble. He entered the atmosphere not as a falling object, but as a contained, hypersonic impact event. The air around him glowed white, then violet, a new, temporary star screaming towards Nevada. The crater this time was not a crater. It was a caldera, a bowl of glass 5 miles wide, its edges glowing a sullen red. Seismic waves raced through the continent, triggering alarms in Mexico and Canada. At the very center, in a pool of slowly cooling silica, Omni-Man landed. He was breathing heavily now, not from fatigue, but from the sheer emotional expenditure of the violence. His pristine suit was scuffed, coated in fine gray dust from the mesa. The knuckles of his hands were raw, the skin abraded. Not from hitting Saitama, but from hitting the asterisk thing's asterisk he had driven Saitama through. The silence in the caldera was absolute, profound, a vacuum of sound after the symphony of destruction. A small bubble formed in the center of the glassy pool. It popped. Saitama sat up. Molten silica dripped off his jumpsuit like water. He looked around at the immensity of the destruction, at the glowing walls of the caldera. He patted out a small, stubborn flame licking at the seam of his shoulder. He examined the spot. There was a smudge of soot, a tiny gray-black mark on the bright yellow fabric. He looked up at Omni-Man. His face, for the first time, showed a clear, unambiguous emotion. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was the profound, petty annoyance of a man whose one nice thing has been carelessly soiled. "Hey," Saitama said. His voice was flat, but it carried perfectly in the stillness. He held out the soiled section of fabric between thumb and forefinger. "My suit got dirty. This was a limited edition from the anniversary sale. It's going to be a pain to get this out." Omni-Man stared. He did not see a being. He saw the void. He saw the absolute final negation of every law he had lived by, fought for, killed for. The GDA's scientific impossibility had been an abstract puzzle. This was visceral, personal reality. He, Nolan Grayson, scourge of the Fimmeran wastes, breaker of the Granidian Titan, the future spearhead of the Viltrumite Empire, had just expended more kinetic energy in 60 seconds than most civilizations used in a century. He had reshaped geography. He had committed an act of geological violence. He had poured the entirety of his legendary strength, his cosmic purpose, his righteous fury into another being. And that being was complaining about laundry. In the GDA command center, the screens showed the smoldering caldera, the two figures at its center. The audio feed brought Saitama's complaint into the sterile room with devastating clarity. No one spoke. Cecil's unlit cigar had been crushed between his fingers, tobacco spilling onto the floor like brown blood. On television screens across the globe, the broadcast was the same. The heroic, desperate struggle was absent. The narrative of good versus evil had no footing. This was not a fight. This was a tantrum. They saw Omni-Man, their invincible protector, the unshakable symbol of ultimate strength and security, reduced to a raging, futile child, hurling a universe of force at a man who would not even acknowledge the game. The horror was not in the scale of the violence. It was in its utter, absolute pointlessness. The strongest being on the planet was powerless. And the being that made him so did not even seem to notice he was being attacked. Omni-Man's face, streaked with rock dust and sweat, underwent a slow, terrible collapse. The majestic rage drained away, like water from a cracked vessel. The contempt evaporated. The certainty crumbled. What remained was not fear, but something colder, more terrifying, more fundamental. A dawning, vertiginous realization. This was not an opponent. This was not an enemy to be overcome through greater strength, or will, or cunning. He was facing a fact, a silent, immovable, indifferent fact of existence, a manifestation of a universe that did not care about lineage, or discipline, or order, or purpose. A universe where infinite power could reside in a vessel of infinite apathy. His empire's entire philosophy, the glorious, bloody, conquering climb to the top of the mountain, was built on the assumption that the mountain had a top. That effort had a ceiling. That strength had a meaning. The man picking soot off his sleeve proved otherwise. The mountain was not just scalable. It was irrelevant. The ceiling did not exist. The meaning was an invention. The seed of rage in his gut froze, cracked, and dissolved into a hollow, howling void. The primal alarm from Chicago was now a deafening, silent siren in his soul. This was not a problem of power, it was a problem of reality. He realized something was fundamentally wrong. The caldera was not an end, it was a rupture. The meticulously staged, contained demonstration in the desert had imploded, and now the chaos spilled out like a virus from a broken vial, metastasizing across the southwest. This was no longer a fight. It was a contagion of frustration, a cataclysmic ballet choreographed by a mind coming undone, performed upon a stage of screaming cities and living, breathing set pieces. Omni-Man, unmoored from the bedrock of his pride and purpose, ceased to be a warrior. He became a force of nature, a hurricane with a consciousness driven by a single screaming impulse to make the paradox asterisk react asterisk, to force the null point to acknowledge the rules of the game it had invalidated. It was a pursuit born of terminal denial. His first tactic was burial. Snatching Saitama from the glassy pit, he crossed the distance to Las Vegas in a blink. The Strip, a river of artificial light and desperate hope, lay glittering below. With a roar that shattered every window for 10 blocks, he hurled Saitama downwards like a spear, aiming for the heart of the Luxor, the Great Black Pyramid. The impact was not an entry, it was a negation. The entire geometric structure seemed to flinch, then implode, Saitama vanishing into a cloud of exploding glass and shorn steel. Omni-Man hovered, chest heaving, watching the mountain of casino collapse in on itself, megatons of concrete, slot machines, and debt dreams avalanching into the crater. From a hole torn in the street 3 blocks away, Saitama climbed out. He brushed fragments of tempered glass from his shoulders. He was not in the crater. He had, it seemed, passed straight through the monument and out the other side of the city block. He looked up just in time to see a section of fractured hotel facade, 20 stories tall, toppling directly towards an elderly couple frozen in the middle of Fremont Street, clutching each other beside an overturned mobility scooter. Saitama stepped over. He placed a hand on the descending slab, a piece of building larger than a house, and stopped it. Not with a crash, but with a gentle arrest, as if catching a falling book. He set it down neatly on the street beside them, closing off an alleyway. He looked at the couple, their faces white with a terror so profound it had erased thought. "You should really evacuate," he said, his voice calm, almost conversational. He pointed a thumb over his shoulder. "I think it's going to get kind of messy around here." A shadow blotted out the artificial canopy lights. Omni-Man descended in a meteor dive, his body a missile aimed at the spot where Saitama stood. The sonic scream preceded him. Saitama gave a small, almost imperceptible sigh and did not move. The dive bomb tore the entire block apart. The explosion of force rippled outwards, vaporizing pavement, flipping cars like toys, and shearing the facades off buildings in a concentric wave of destruction. When the dust cleared, there was a new, smoldering crater. The elderly couple were untouched, standing on a lone, miraculously intact island of asphalt, Saitama having positioned himself between them and the epicenter. Omni-Man rose from the pit, his eyes wild, scanning. Saitama was already looking past him, noticing a fire hydrant sheared off, now geysering water high into the air. "What a waste," he mumbled. The collateral damage was not incidental. It was apocalyptic, and it was televised. Every news network, every streaming service, every phone camera held by a trembling hand broadcast the unfolding cataclysm in real time. Millions watched as their landmarks, symbols of human audacity and folly, were unmade. But a new, perverse narrative began to emerge in the commentary, a slow, sickening shift in focus. It moved from Omni-Man versus the unknown hero to a more philosophical, more terrifying headline. The unmoving object and the unstoppable force. And the unmoving object kept asterisk interrupting asterisk. In downtown Phoenix, Omni-Man, in a fit of tactical fury, used his heat vision to slice the support columns of the chase tower, aiming to bring the entire structure down onto Saitama's head. As the great building groaned and began its toppling arc, Saitama, standing directly in its shadow, glanced sideways. A city bus, caught in the panic, had been flung through the air by a secondary shockwave, tumbling end over end towards a crowded emergency shelter entrance. Saitama took 2 casual steps to his left, reached out with one hand, and caught the bus by its rear axle. He set it down gently on its wheels, the doors perfectly aligned with the shelter's ramp. Inside, children stared, wide-eyed through the windshield. He gave them a small, awkward wave just as the shadow of the collapsing skyscraper engulfed him. The screen went white with dust. When it cleared, he was standing on a pile of rubble that was once the tower's crown, brushing powdered concrete from his sleeve. The bus and the shelter were intact, 100 yards away. Over the skies of San Diego, Omni-Man, utilizing speed now, a blur of crimson, would smash into Saitama, sending him careening like a pinball through the skyline. Saitama, tumbling backwards through the air, would suddenly arrest his motion. He'd pause, hanging in midair as if spotting something. Below, a family sedan, lifted by a passing shockwave, was spiraling out of control. Saitama adjusted his trajectory minutely, dipped down, and gave the car's hood a precise, gentle tap with his foot, stabilizing its spin and redirecting it onto the clear expanse of a freeway. The moment of focus gave Omni-Man the opening he needed. He slammed into Saitama from behind, driving him through the containment dome of the Diablo Canyon power plant. The subsequent explosion lit the coastal night with an actinic blue-white fury. The contrast, captured in stunning, horrifying high definition, was maddening. One being, a god of legend, was engaged in a total, universe-shattering tantrum, expending civilizations' worth of energy to prove a metaphysical point. The other, a bored-looking man in a stained costume, seemed mildly irritated that the tantrum was interfering with his vague, pedestrian sense of civic duty. He wasn't fighting Omni-Man, he was multitasking. In the GDA's deepest bunker, the air had become a solid mass of data and dread. Cecil Stedman stood before the warboard, a man watching 2 supernovas approach his house and trying to decide which heat would incinerate him first. One monitor streamed global casualty estimates, numbers climbing with a steady, horrifying rhythm. Another showed tectonic stress sensors flashing red across the Pacific plate. A third displayed the ever-present, maddening flatline of Saitama's biosigns, a perfect, unchanging zero amid the screaming data. "He's saving people," a young analyst murmured, her voice hushed with a kind of reverent horror. She pointed to a subfeed showing the stabilized sedan rolling safely to a stop. "Look at the precision. No one on the ground is even hurt where he intervenes." Cecil didn't turn. His good eye was fixed on the main screen, on Omni-Man's face, twisted into something unrecognizable. "He's causing this," Cecil ground out, the words scraped from somewhere cold and metallic within him. "His mere existence is the provocation. Omni-Man was a known quantity, a stable, predictable apex predator. We had protocols, contingencies, a leash, however fragile." He finally turned, his gaze sweeping the room, silencing the soft chatter of analysis. Asterisk. This asterisk. This is not a predator. It's a black hole. It doesn't asterisk act asterisk. It just asterisk is asterisk. And reality. He gestured violently at the screens of destruction. Asterisk breaks asterisk around it. It warps everything in its event horizon, physics, psychology, our asterisk strongest protector, into nonsense. He turned back, staring at the flatline signature. The unthinkable calculus formed in his mind, cold and clear. Which was the greater existential threat? The raging god actively trying to pound the world into submission, or the indifferent fact whose passive presence drove gods mad and made a mockery of cause and effect? One could, in theory, be destroyed. The other could only be awaited. On the shattered edges of Los Angeles, where the conflict had drifted like a toxic storm, Mark Grayson moved through his assigned evacuation sector. He was not invincible here. He was a paramedic, a mover of rubble, a guide for the shell-shocked. His ribs ached fiercely where a rebar beam had struck him hours before. The nanites were healing it, but the pain was a constant, honest throb. His new suit, a symbol of his burgeoning legacy, was stained with his own blood, the dust of collapsed buildings, and the darker, more intimate stains of people he'd pulled from the wreckage, some alive, some not. He looked up, and he saw them. His father, Nolan, was a screaming scar across the sky. There was no tactics left, no grim purpose. His attacks were wild, desperate, unhinged. He bellowed not words, but raw, guttural sounds of fury and a fear so deep it had no name. He was the unstoppable force, and he was coming completely undone. And he saw Saitama, a blank space, a quiet eye in the hurricane. Mark watched as Saitama, in the middle of being driven through a bank tower, somehow pivoted in midair to kick a falling air conditioning unit away from a firefighter's ladder truck below. The act was so effortless, so ancillary to the apocalyptic violence engulfing him, amid stole the breath from Mark's lungs. His own hands were trembling from fatigue. Every scar on his body, every lesson learned through pain, every principle of with great power comes great responsibility that he was trying to forge into a life. It all felt suddenly, devastatingly small. This bald man wasn't overcoming overwhelming odds. He was demonstrating that the odds were an illusion. The entire concept of heroic struggle, the very meaning Mark was bleeding to find, was being rendered a quaint, parochial fiction by a man who looked faintly bored. What was a hero's sacrifice in a universe where sacrifice was unnecessary? What was the value of hard-won victory when victory could be achieved with less effort than making breakfast? Omni-Man's psychological disintegration reached its event horizon. With a shriek that broke every remaining window in the financial district, he grabbed Saitama from the air. He didn't punch, he didn't throw, he locked him in a crushing, full-body bear hug, arms like hydraulic presses, and shot upwards. Not to space for a tactical advantage. He flew them into a low, grazing orbit, the curve of the Earth vast and beautiful below, the atmosphere a thin, blue memory. He began to shout, the words transmitted through the vacuum by the force of his will, vibrating through Saitama's body, if not the air. You see it? You see the weakness? The fragility? This is what they are. This is what you defend. A specks, dust. They inherit nothing. They build nothing that lasts. The Empire is coming, and they will be swept aside. Your indifference means nothing. Your power means nothing against destiny. Saitama, hanging limply in the crushing grip, looked down. He watched the continents scroll past, the vast blue of the oceans. His ears wiggled. He blinked. The atmosphere is really thin up here, he commented, his voice a calm, almost thoughtful statement in the silent, screaming tension of Omni-Man's grasp. My ears popped. It's annoying. The last frayed wire in Nolan Grayson's mind snapped. The lecture, the rage, the cosmic destiny, all of it fused into a single white-hot point of catastrophic intent. Reason was gone. Strategy was gone. There was only the paradox in his arms and the need to make it asterisk mean asterisk something. With a final shattered cry that was equal parts fury, despair, and utter world-ending negation, he made his choice. He would not win through strength. He would not convince through reason. He would make the indifferent god asterisk feel asterisk. If not pain, then consequence. He would tie the null point to the fate of the fragile things below. Still locked in the bear hug, he twisted in space. He pointed them both downward, not at a desert, not at a wasteland, but at the glowing, crowded heart of a sleeping city. St. Louis, its arch glinting in the moonlight. He became not a fighter, but a missile. He became the delivery system for his own final, terrible argument. He would use their combined mass, his acceleration, the inevitable city-annihilating impact as his weapon. He would make Saitama the anchor for a genocide. He would force the uncaring universe to witness the cost of its own indifference. It was no longer a test of strength. It was a tantrum of cosmic proportions. He was going to kill a city to prove a point to avoid. He went all out, no restraint, no thought, only the obliteration of the paradox in his arms and everything in its shadow. The descent was not a fall. It was an act of cosmic spite, a prayer to the god of violence. a screaming meteor of red and white, trailing a tail of incandescent plasma that blazed across the Midwestern sky like a second vengeful sun. Omni-Man's face, glimpsed in the hellish light of re-entry, was a rictus of pure, unhinged effort. Every muscle in his body stood out in corded relief, a topographic map of strain. His teeth were bared in a silent, grinding scream, his lips peeled back from gums. His eyes, wide and white-rimmed, held not fury, but the absolute mind-breaking strain of containing and directing a catastrophic energy that wanted to explode in all directions. He was not just surrendering to gravity, he was asterisk pushing asterisk. He poured every last erg of his Viltrumite heritage, every ounce of his conqueror's pride, every shred of his disintegrating sanity into a single focused imperative. Asterisk, accelerate asterisk. To make the impact not just a disaster, but an extinction-level event. To fuse his destiny with the void in his arms and imprint it upon the planet in a crater of molten grief. The air around them ceased to be air. It ionized into a sheath of violet-white energy, a screaming cocoon of superheated physics. The city below, St. Louis, slumbering along the gentle curve of the Mississippi, resolved from a patch of light into a detailed map of doom. The gateway arch, a silver thread against the dark water. The grids of streets, precise and logical. The countless pinpricks of light from windows, cars, street lamps, each one a life, a story, a fragile beating heart. They were tiny, oblivious specks on the target he had chosen. In his arms, locked in a grip that could have compressed neutronium, Saitama looked down. He saw the arch. He saw the wide, dark ribbon of the river. He saw the neat geometry of neighborhoods, the clustered lights of downtown. He saw the specific intersection Omni-Man was aiming for, a nexus of bridges and railways and crowded residential blocks. He absorbed it all with a single sweeping glance. His face, illuminated from below by the city lights and from above by the plasma fire, showed no fear, no anger, no heroic resolve. A faint, almost imperceptible sigh escaped his lips. It was not a sigh of anger or determination. It was the weary, resigned sigh of a man who has discovered a tedious, messy chore at the end of a very long day. The sigh of someone who has to clean up a spilled drink. The sigh of ultimate inconvenience. For the first time since arriving in this loud, effortful universe, Saitama moved with intent. It was not a dramatic motion. There was no roar to shake the heavens. No powering up, no aura erupting in a pyrotechnic display of gathered might. No shifting of feet into a heroic stance. He was still locked in Omni-Man's world-crushing bear hug, his back pressed to the Viltrumite's chest, their bodies a single, screaming projectile. He simply brought his right arm back. His elbow bent to a precise 90-degree angle. The motion was clean, economical, devoid of any flourish. His gloved fist closed. It looked ordinary. A human fist encased in cheap red fabric. It did not glow. It did not crackle with energy. It was just a fist, pulled back beside his ear. He punched Omni-Man in the chest. The punch was not flashy. There was no beam of light lancing into the sky, no eruption of colorful aura, no thunderclap of gathered force being released. It was a simple physical connection. The red fabric of his glove met the white, stylized V emblem on Omni-Man's chest. A touch. The sound was wrong. It should have been the loudest sound ever recorded on Earth. A collision of celestial bodies, a continent-breaking asterisk boom asterisk that would echo in the ears of survivors for generations. It should have been the sound of the world ending. It was a soft, wet, profoundly final thump. The sound a giant's heart makes when it stops for the last time. The sound of a door closing in a vast, empty cathedral. A sound so quiet, so intimate, it was more felt than heard by the sensors straining to capture it. The effect was not a release of energy, it was a cancellation of physics. Every sensor on the planet, from the deepest oceanic seismograph to the most delicate orbital gravimetric array, spiked into the red for 1 nanosecond and then flatlined. Not into zero, but into a null reading, as if the concept of measurement itself had been locally invalidated. Seismographs scribbled frantic, impossible lines, not the jagged peaks of an earthquake, but smooth, parabolic curves that defied every known model of energy propagation. Before their needles physically snapped, overcome by the instruction to graph the impossible. The atmosphere itself rippled asterisk. A visible shockwave, not of force, but of distorted reality, expanded in a perfect, silent sphere from the point of contact. It was a lensing effect, bending light, making the stars behind it swim and twist. It moved faster than sound, faster than light through the medium of air, a wall of pure conceptual pressure. It passed over St. Louis. It was not destructive in any conventional sense. It did not shatter. It pressed asterisk. Skyscrapers, monuments of steel and glass bent. They bowed like tall grass under a gentle, universal hand, their windows liquefying silently into a glittering, suspended dust that hung in the air, refusing to fall. The gateway arch flexed, its silver curve oscillating like a plucked violin string, singing a single subsonic note of strained metal. The Mississippi River, for a stretch of 5 miles, was asterisk pushed asterisk upwards. Not in a splash, not in a geyser, but in a perfect, clean, cylindrical wall of water 1,000 feet high. It hung there, defying gravity, a shimmering, impossible pillar holding the reflection of the distorted moon and the fading plasma trail. For one eternal second, the riverbed lay exposed, ancient and glistening. At the epicenter, Omni-Man did not scream. There was no time. The force that hit him was not an opposing energy to be met, strained against, or overcome. It was a fundamental, absolute cancellation. All his velocity, all his gathered kinetic fury, his desperate world-killing momentum, it was erased, not countered, but asterisk, unwritten asterisk. The physical grip of his arms around Saitama did not break. It turned to dust, the atoms of his hands and forearms simply ceasing to cohere. The mighty chest plate, the symbol of Viltrumite invincibility that had weathered supernovae and asteroid impacts, did not crack or shatter. It vaporized transitioning from solid to dissociated particles without passing through any intermediate state. The white fabric, the dense musculature beneath, the sternum, the heart, the spine. The shockwave traveled through him not as a destructive force, but as a nullification wave. It was the universe hitting the delete key on his biological cohesion. He was released. For a millisecond, Nolan Grayson existed as a concept suspended in the thin, cold air 50,000 feet above Missouri. He was not in pain. There was no mechanism left to feel it. His eyes were wide, clear, seeing. He saw the empty sky above, vast and uncaring. He saw Saitama, already beginning a gentle, controlled descent, not even granting him the dignity of a backward glance. And in that final crystalline microsecond, a perfect and terrifying clarity flooded the ruins of his mind. He understood. He understood the true, horrific meaning of the word asterisk, invincible asterisk. It was not a goal to be achieved through strength and will. It was not a mantle earned by the strongest. It was a state of being, a simple, indifferent fact, like gravity but personal. And it had never, ever been meant for him. His entire life, the discipline, the conquests, the empire, the destiny, had been a magnificent, bloody pantomime performed in the shadow of a truth he was too small to conceive. He had not been defeated. He had been asterisk corrected asterisk. Then, the Viltrumite, Nolan Grayson, Omni-Man, husband of Debbie, father of Mark, scourge of the Thraxan system, ceased to exist as a contiguous being. There was no explosion, no grand pyrotechnic death. He underwent a transition so complete it was less than dissolution. He became a fine aerosolized red mist, a cloud of microscopic organic particles caught in the high-altitude winds. The gentle, continental breeze of the punch's aftermath, the very air displaced by the ripple of reality, caught this mist and scattered it, painting a faint, pinkish haze across the stratosphere that would catch the rising sun in a beautiful, tragic sunrise for days to come. Saitama landed. He touched down in a deserted side street in St. Louis, his boots making a soft asterisk tap asterisk on the cracked asphalt. Around him, the city groaned softly as it settled. The bent skyscrapers swayed back to near vertical with long metallic sighs. The wall of water in the river collapsed, but not in a catastrophic flood. It fell back in a smooth, controlled cascade, a sighing roar that was more relief than destruction, filling its banks with surprising neatness. The glittering glass dust settled like diamond rain. He looked at his knuckles. He turned his right hand over, examining the red glove. There was no tear, no scorch mark. He brushed it against his thigh, a habitual, fastidious gesture. He then looked up, tilting his head back to scan the sky. His eyes traced the fading plasma trail, then found the faint, rose-colored smear dissipating against the deepening blue of the pre-dawn. "I told you," he murmured, his voice flat and quiet in the surreal silence. The words were not for the world, not for the listening microphones of a stunned planet. They were a statement of mundane fact, spoken to himself, a confirmation of a boring truth. One punch is enough. The world watched the aftermath not on screens filled with spectacular explosions, but on feeds plagued by static, distortion, and impossible data. The surviving drones sent back footage of a city that had been bent but not broken, of a river that had stood on end, of a sky stained pink. They saw the bald man landing in the street, brushing off his glove, looking up. They did not see a battle. They witnessed the execution of an idea. The idea that strength was a struggle, that power must roar, must announce itself with fury and light, that victory was something to be asterisk one asterisk. To be asterisk earned asterisk through sacrifice and pain and will. That idea, the bedrock of their violent, heroic, tragic world, had just been punctured. Not defeated in debate, but erased with a soft asterisk thump asterisk. That idea was now a fine genetic mist drifting on the jet stream, soon to be rain. The silence that followed across the globe was deeper than any that had come after the loudest explosions, the most tragic news bulletins. It was not the silence of shock, but of profound collective disorientation. It was the silence of a universe, or at least one small, troubled corner of it, holding its breath, reassessing its core rules, wondering what to do with a fact that had just walked in and rearranged the furniture of reality without asking. In the cold, endless dark between stars, aboard a vessel of conquest that had known no defeat for millennia, a console emitted a soft, persistent chime. A Viltrumite officer, his face a mask of stern perfection, checked the readout. The genetic signature of Nolan Grayson, operative prime for Sector 9 Sol, had not gone dark. That would imply a loss of signal, a malfunction. It had simply ceased. The monitoring system did not register a death. It registered a transition from is to is not without an intervening event. The data was incoherent, a logical error in the Empire's flawless tracking matrix. The officer stared at the screen for a long, cold moment, then initiated a priority transmission to High Command. The message was brief, stripped of all imperial grandeur, containing only the chilling, unfamiliar weight of confusion. Operative Grayson signal null, not terminated. Null, cause non-existent, requesting clarification. The Viltrumite Empire, for the first time in its recorded history, had encountered a result it could not classify. It noticed the sudden, absolute, and inexplicable void where its premier warrior once was. The weeks that followed were not a recovery. They were a quiet, global fever dream, a collective concussion from which the patient awoke to a world subtly, irrevocably warped. The planet entered a state of psychological shock, masked by the mundane machinery of repair. There were no parades for the defeat of Omni-Man, no medals, no presidential addresses hailing a new dawn. The silence that had fallen after the asterisk thump asterisk over Missouri simply persisted, deepening, hardening into a new ambient condition. The physical scars were the easiest to process and thus became a fixation. The city of St. Louis, or rather its new architectural phenomena, became a pilgrimage site. The bent skyscrapers of downtown did not lean like the Tower of Pisa. They curved, as if a giant hand had stroked them with affectionate pressure. The metal and glass had flowed, then reset in graceful parabolic arcs. Engineers, armed with scanners and stress models, swarmed the sites, their faces growing increasingly pale. The structures were not damaged, Their atomic lattices were perfectly intact, just rearranged. The force applied had not been destructive. It had been asterisk persuasive asterisk. Reinforced concrete and structural steel had behaved like soft clay under a sculptor's thumb. The gateway arch, after its impossible oscillation, now held a permanent, faint harmonic hum, detectable only by the most sensitive equipment. A song of strained physics it would sing for centuries. Scientists from every discipline converged, not to study destruction, but to study the asterisk of it. They published papers with titles like Non-Dispersive Kinetic Cancellation at Macro Scale and The Missouri Anomaly, Evidence of Localized Causality Violation. The peer reviews came back not with criticisms, but with concerned suggestions for psychiatric evaluation. The data was not contradictory. It was incoherent asterisk. It described an event that had massive continent-scale effects while obeying none of the laws governing energy, momentum, or thermodynamics. The shockwave had propagated faster than sound without creating a sonic boom. It had bent skyscrapers without generating heat or shock front debris. It was as if reality itself had been asked to perform a task and had done so by temporarily forgetting its own rulebook. The papers were retracted. The scientists mostly took sabbaticals, staring at walls. The psychological scars were deeper, invisible, and far more dangerous. The Guardians of the Globe did not officially disband. There was no meeting, no vote. One day they simply stopped answering the call. The bonds forged in battle could not withstand the vacuum of meaning they had witnessed. Immortal was the first to vanish. He was found weeks later in a remote cabin in the Alaskan wilderness, not by design, but by a hiker. He was not brooding or training. He was sitting on a porch, whittling a piece of wood, his eyes focused on a middle distance that held nothing. When asked, he gave no grand speech about retirement. He said, "What's the point of being unkillable when killable isn't even a relevant category anymore?" His immortality was no longer a blessing or a curse. It was a grammatical error in a sentence that had been erased. Atomeve found Mark on a hill overlooking a rebuilding sector of Chicago. She sat beside him, not speaking for a long time. Her power, the ability to rearrange matter at a subatomic level, had always felt like a profound, godlike secret. She could create food from air, buildings from rubble, life from inert elements. She finally broke the silence. "It feels like moving deck chairs on the Titanic now," she said, her voice soft. "You can arrange them perfectly, make beautiful patterns, but you're still on the Titanic. And you just saw the iceberg get flicked away like a piece of dust by something that wasn't even on the ship's manifest." The scale of what they had witnessed did not humble their powers. It made them feel like charming, irrelevant parlor tricks performed in the shadow of a mountain that had just decided to go for a walk. Mark visited his mother. The house in Baltimore was preternaturally quiet. Debbie Grayson moved through it like a ghost, touching Nolan's reading chair, his coffee mug in the sink. She was not drowning in hysterical grief. Her sorrow was a vast, dry, silent desert. Mark sat with her at the kitchen table. He didn't cry. He held her hand. The man who had raised him, who had taught him to throw a baseball, who had lied to him about the stars, who had tried to break his spine. That man had not died a hero's death. He had not been struck down by a noble rival or sacrificed himself for a greater good. He had been erased, reduced to atmospheric residue by a man who was, at most, mildly inconvenienced. All of Nolan's teachings, the brutal Viltrumite truths, the lies of benevolent heroism, the entire complex, painful tapestry of his legacy, had been rendered not just false, but absurd a magnificent cosmic joke with a punchline delivered by a sigh. Mark's path forward was no longer about living up to a Viltrumite ideal or rejecting one. It was about building a shelter in the philosophical rubble. His costume, when he looked at it, no longer felt like a mantle. It felt like a child's blanket, a comforting but transparently flimsy piece of cloth against the new chill in the universe. In the GDA's perpetual midnight, Cecil Stedman stood before his wall of screens, a general without an army, a strategist without a board. One screen showed a mundane live feed from a nanodrone embedded into the ceiling of a modest apartment. Saitama was on his couch, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, watching a cartoon on a cheap television. He lifted a forkful of instant noodles to his mouth, chewed slowly, his expression blank. The most powerful entity on the planet was contemplating the humorous plight of a cartoon pig. Another screen displayed the deep space monitoring array. The signatures were clear, though distant. Viltrumite approach vectors. But their pattern had changed. The aggressive, direct trajectories were gone. They had slowed. They were maneuvering into high observation orbits, holding position. They were cautious. The predators were sniffing the wind, confused by the scent of a new kind of fire. The third screen scrolled with text. It was a philosophical tract, self-published by a previously obscure theologian from Oslo, titled On the Existential Threat of the Benevolent Null. Cecil had read it 7 times. One line was highlighted. A malevolent God can be opposed, for evil is a motive. A benevolent God can be worshipped, for goodness is a comfort. But a null God, a force of pure, indifferent capability, offers no purchase for rebellion or devotion. It simply negates the stage upon which our moral dramas are performed. Cecil's calculus was irrevocably altered. Omni-Man had been a caged tiger, fierce, deadly, predictable. You could feed it, point it, study its habits, design stronger bars. Saitama was the earthquake that had not only shattered the cage, but had then, with a vague wave of its hand, convinced the tiger to lie down and take a nap. The greater threat was not the entity that acted with intent, however violent. It was the entity whose mere presence, rewrote the rules of action, of conflict, of cause and effect itself. Cecil's entire life's work, the control, the contingency, the managed application of power, was revealed as a sandcastle built below the tideline of a new, incomprehensible ocean. He could not mobilize against him. To issue an order to contain, threaten, or attack Saitama would be an act of such profound, tragicomic futility that it would be the punchline to the universe's joke. Control, Cecil understood with a cold, final clarity was an illusion. It had not died a dramatic death. It had ceased with a soft asterisk thump asterisk over the Midwest, as unnoticed by the cause as the popping of a soap bubble. In the outer dark, aboard the lead Viltrumite command vessel, the final telemetry from Earth was analyzed, reanalyzed, and subjected to logic scanners that had never before returned an error code. The data was not merely contradictory, it was a logical paradox. It described the total, instantaneous cessation of a premier warrior's biological and energetic signature, coincident with a kinetic event that displayed zero propagative properties. It was victory without combat, death without a cause. The report did not conclude with enemy engaged, threat assessed. It concluded with event logged, causality indeterminate. The Empire did not rage. Rage was for obstacles. This was not an obstacle. This was an anomaly. For the first time in its glorious, bloody history of conquest, the Viltrumite Empire encountered a asterisk, result asterisk it could not classify, rather than an enemy it could crush. The communications from high command were not calls for vengeance, but for recalibration. The orders crackled across the fleet, devoid of their usual triumphant fury. Observe, monitor, do not engage, containment through strategic non-provocation. Reassess the human resource classification from assets and labor to contextual variable. The unstoppable force of Viltrumite destiny had met an immovable object in Saitama, and the result was not a collision, but a quiet, horrifying subtraction. Their calculus of conquest had attempted a division by zero, and the system had returned an error. Saitama stood on his tiny balcony, the one that came with his government-assigned apartment. He looked out at the city lights, quieter now, less frantic. The repair work had a solemn, hushed quality. When he walked to the store, people didn't cheer or ask for autographs. They saw the yellow suit and averted their eyes, quickening their steps, as if direct eye contact might transmit the contagion of his unsettling calm. They didn't see a hero. They saw the void that had swallowed their old god, and they feared the appetite of nothingness. He missed his old world. He missed King and Genos's loud repairs, and the predictable, almost ritualistic appearance of city-destroying monsters that broke up the monotony of bargain days. Here, the violence was too real, too wet, too freighted with a consequence that everyone seemed to feel so deeply asterisk. The heroes here weren't weirdos or narcissists. They were traumatized soldiers, their eyes old with effort and loss. And now, the one person who had seemed like he might, just might, finally offer a challenge, a real fight, had been no different. Just another sigh, another chore. He considered leaving. The dimensional crack that brought him here was a one-way anomaly. But where one flaw existed, another might be found. The thought was there at the back of his mind, a possible exit. But then he remembered. The new Superfoods Plus Downtown was having a grand opening sale tomorrow. 50% off all frozen dumplings and energy drinks. And there was a strange, heavy quiet over the world now. It wasn't peace, not really. It was the quiet of a breath held, of a watched pot. It wasn't fun. It was tense and a little depressing. But it was something to do. The dumplings were reportedly very good. He remained. He did not set up a school. He did not give interviews. He did not patrol with purpose. He existed, a silent, walking question mark, punctuating a universe that had always communicated in exclamation points of violence and screams of effort. He was an uncaring mirror held up to the bloody, striving drama of heroism, and the reflection it showed was not of villains and heroes, but of ants building elaborate hills, unaware of the boot that could, without malice or even notice, render it all flat. The most terrifying thing he had defeated was not a Viltrumite warrior. It was a narrative, the story the world told itself about strength, struggle, and meaning. He had not broken that story. He had proven it fictional. Final monologue. Narration. Asterisk. In this world, strength always demanded payment. It was a transaction wired into the bedrock of reality. You paid in blood, in sacrifice, in pieces of your soul carved away with every victory. It was a brutal, honest economy. A hero was someone who walked into that marketplace, looked at the price, and paid it so others wouldn't have to. Their sweat was the currency. Their scars were the receipt. Their struggle was the very meaning of their power. It was what made them more than just strong. It made them righteous. Asterisk. Then he arrived, and we watched, live on every screen, as the strongest among us. The being who embodied that transaction, who had paid in centuries of conquest and wore his power like a crown of absolute certainty, poured the entirety of his meaning, his legacy, his brutal, beautiful effort into a void. Asterisk, and the void gave back nothing. Not contempt, not victory, not even acknowledgement. A blink, a sigh, a complaint about a stained, limited edition suit. Asterisk. The punch was not dramatic. That was the worst part. There was no spectacle to hide behind, no cathartic explosion to absorb our shock. It was an administrative gesture, a keystroke. It settled the matter. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a correction. Asterisk. Now, we rebuild our cities, but we cannot rebuild our philosophies. The old blueprints are useless. We watch the skies, not just for new threats, but for the lingering shadow of that indifference. What is a hero in a world where the ultimate power is not a weapon to be wielded with passion, but a fact to be endured with passive confusion? Where the act of saving a single life and the act of negating a galactic conqueror require the same minimal, effortless, boredom-driven motion? Asterisk. He is still here, in an apartment we pay for, eating noodles we subsidize. He is bored. Asterisk. And we have never been more afraid, not of what he might do. He has shown us what he does. He shops, he sighs, he punches. Asterisk. We are afraid of what his existence means we never were. The struggle was all we had, and he proved it was optional.